Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today magazine, HRO Today APAC, and HRO Today EMEA, as well as produce the HRO Today forums and events held around the world, and we manage the HRO Today Association. Today, we're going to talk about the talent acquisition supply chain. I'm joined by Carolyn Levy, who is the president of Procom. I'm going to get to her in just a moment and her bio. Let me first set the stage. The talent acquisition process is rightfully described as a supply chain. At one end is the employer. On the other end is the prospective employee, whether employed full-time, temporarily, as a consultant, or as a member of a term-based project team. Simple. On one end, an employer, and on the other end, a person who does the work. In the middle are talent suppliers, recruiting and contingent labor service providers, and sometimes multiple layers. We rarely ever discuss the issue of trust in those suppliers, but we should. We have conversations about assurance in non-human equipment supply chains. Let's bring that word assurance into the world of the most important capital, the human capital. We have someone who has a great deal of passion around this topic and is building the brand of the company she operates based on trust, and we should listen to her message. Allow me to introduce Carolyn Levy, the president of consulting services for Procom. Carolyn Levy is a veteran of the workforce services industry. Prior to Procom, she was an executive with the global giant Randstad, holding several executive roles in North America, including managing director of their digital workforce services company. She joined Procom in 2025 as president of their consulting services business, which provides contract staffing, IT consulting, global talent and technology, and direct hire. Carolyn, welcome to the podcast. And anything you'd like to add about Procom for our audience?
Thank you, Elliot. It's such a pleasure to be here. Maybe just quick perspective on our history. We opened our doors in 1978, so it's been a bit of a journey. In Canada, we spread right across North America, but I think you did a great job just at introducing really what we're doing. For our viewers and our listeners today, I think it would be great for everyone out the gate to understand what we're really organized around. You brought up trust already, but we treat trust in the talent supply as the central problem to what we're dealing with, not just a feature. So the moment, if you think of a resume entering our funnel, that's when the verification starts. It's not after the hiring is happening. That's one of the reasons I came into Procom. I love the perspective that at this organization, we're getting in front of what some of the scariest things in the business are, not what necessarily everybody else is focused on. So we're taking this really seriously. Hence, that's where the passion's coming from, Elliot. So I'm so pleased to be here with you today.
Well, I trust you will do a great job. So let me now ask you the question about trust.
Okay.
So you and I recently spoke about this issue of trust in the talent supply chain, and obviously you have a great deal of concern about this and a lot of perspective. I'd like you to take a moment to expand on what you just discussed and explain to our audience what the issues that you think are most important in terms of trust in the talent supply chain and the risk that employers need to consider when they're selecting vendors as it applies to this concept of trust and assurance.
Yes, awesome. So let's go on a little bit of a journey. For one main call out, trust failures in talent supply, they're not new. Like our COO, Wendy Kenna, she has been spotting and excluding fraud rings basically since the middle of the 2000s. But something that's really interesting for us as an organization is because we work with an amazing group of private and public sector organizations, we have this conversation with thousands of candidates every single month. So just think of the surface area that we have because of those conversations. We see fraud signals by the structure and just by design of our business that really most organizations just generally don't. So let's talk about what's changed in the last 3 years and what's really been significant here. For one, problems definitely accelerated. And it might surprise you, might not, but it's really around remote work being one of the biggest concerns. Because think of this, when the candidate doesn't have to walk through an office, the gap between when you screen and who shows up that day becomes harder to actually close. So, in the market, I'm sure you've heard this, and your listeners have heard this too, return to office following COVID has actually been difficult, but there is an uptick of organizations moving into that direction. And this type of issue around trust and fraud is one of the reasons that's driving it. So I love when I'm joining podcasts or I'm listening to anything that makes things really digestible. So I hope this would be helpful for everyone to think in a couple of categories. I'm going to only go into 3 categories of risk that we see in the supply chain right now. One, I think every employer has got to view all 3 to get out the gate before we say what the 3 are. But the first I would say is innocent fraud. And I carefully use that term. It's
innocent
kind of
fraud.
Innocent fraud. It's like fluffy fraud. I don't know which one is the better one to say, but it's been around forever. And really it's caught often by a mature vetting process, right? It's, if they're fluffing it, it's like, I'm going to stretch what I'm saying necessarily in my resume and hope that it gets me through the gate as opposed to being screened out, right? So, if I think a little more concretely for what people might have seen, it's that the person may have the ability to do the role, but they haven't done it at the large shop or within a specified industry, or they only have overseas experience. We see that a lot. In order to get the job, they want to fabricate their experience a bit, but they actually can technically do the work, right? That's why it's kind of innocent, if we keep that term. So the person of who they say are in the physical form then versus the person who shows up at work, it's a little different, but you hired them under the pretense of existing in another organization. So that's where the actual catch comes through. Does that make sense for you? That innocent little piece?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about in the permanent hire world as exaggerating credentials, and that was not uncommon and continues to be. So, what are the other 2 categories?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the other aspect of that, I'd say the more less innocent still following in that category is when someone's really beefing things up. And they know they actually can't do the job. So different scenario, they're sitting there from a different entry point and saying I can't actually do the job, but I'm going to try to fake it till I make it. So now let's go into something that gets more serious. And my third point is the most serious. This is the second. This is where it's intentional. This is where it's really organized. This is where we see groups often operating, unfortunately, in the offshore call center scenario. They're running coordinated massive schemes, right? So they'll fake call and put through a candidate right into the hiring process that's an unqualified person that's getting into the role. And then they take a percentage of the wage of a kickback, right? So it's just an organized way that a call center approach is going in and a scheme is designed to rip off what's going into the system. And there's, we saw this really heavily through COVID, where it wasn't just about let's get a couple cycles of pay before we get caught that we don't know what we're doing and then we're dismissed. It's sometimes that people are in there with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs, right? And they're running it at the exact same time. So this is sophistication. This is financially motivated frauds, and they are targeting the staffing industry directly. The third one, let's go into spy mode, if we want to say it that way. The FBI's documented and prosecuted nation state intelligence operations with fraudulent contract replacements that are meant to gain access into secure environments, right? Think of some areas that's really targeted. It's financial services, going into defense, going into consulting firms. Those are kind of the end markets, but it's a really serious, scary thing. We haven't personally caught anyone, and I don't think that most employers necessarily will encounter that scenario. But if you are a critical institution, you cannot take that out of your threat model. Those are the 3 real things that I think are great takeaways for everyone listening. But I want to pull this into Procom a bit, right? I'm proud to be here, right? I've only been here 6 months, but man, we've got a bright future ahead of us. And let me talk a little bit about the principle that's driving our operating model. And I don't want people to lose or leave this session confused here, Elliot. We have got to keep trust in people. That is getting disrupted. But here's what's going on. most of the real people that are knocking at the door to get in, they're honest. But here's the thing. The top of the funnel is crazy messy. There's so much noise with the bot applications, the falsified resumes, automated submissions. It's skewing everything that's making it look like humanity is becoming dishonest. But we're not. I've seen this evolution of a phrase from keep the human in the loop when we're using AI. It actually needs to be human in the lead. I just heard that earlier this week. We got to be at the front end of that. And that's really what we're trying to do at Procom. So I don't want anyone leaving and saying, people are becoming more dishonest. What is this terrible trend? That is not the case. It's the illusion that's coming with everything that's going on the top end of the funnel.
You've outlined two or three scenarios here. The first one, the innocent probably can do the job, maybe exaggerate a little bit around the edges. That doesn't sound very scary.
No.
But when you get all the way down to the second, which is call centers, and this also, by the way, not only happened during COVID because of the overseas call centers, but we had a problem with remote work where people had multiple jobs and they were just waiting to get fired and collecting paychecks and filling out time slips. This was significant. And the third, which is potentially either fraud rings or nation state actors penetrating environments with contractors, attempting to get access to corporate assets or corporate information.
Yeah.
What are you at Procom? What are you doing to ensure that your clients are protected from these kinds of threats? And what are the ways that a potential client of Procom should qualify you or qualify one of your competitors as a supplier to ensure that these threat or risk levels are reduced in their talent supply chain? What are you doing? What should a potential client of Procom, what's the question they should ask you to make sure you're doing that?
Right. Okay. So love the question, and it gives lots of layers, which makes it interesting, hopefully from a podcast perspective too, for all of our listeners. And I would be remiss, we represent thousands and thousands and thousands of humans that are working, if I didn't say again that the work is not about treating any of our candidates like they're suspects, right? Mm-hmm. It's really about building systems that are verifying credibility at each step of the hiring process, that we've got the really right controls in place to protect against potential fraud, to protect against anyone that's an unqualified candidate, or like you said, the fraud rings, and in the rare cases, as we mentioned, something that's much more serious. But it's really about the systems that have the length to run the entire engagement, not just be about the front door, right? And lots of organizations verify the front door, right? The person who shows up, again, isn't always the person who's screened. The resume is getting submitted and the history that they put there, as we mentioned earlier, it's often not something that's verified. So before we get into where Procom has shifted, think even at the top of this part of questions you would ask before you hear what we're doing, right? One, when you're looking from selecting vendors, and these are questions I would recommend everyone asks, is how is your vendor verifying their candidates? Is it that continuous process, or is it only at intake? Are they cross-checking the signals that they're seeing across the life cycle of that intake, or do they trust just a single check? Like in the world of recruitment, it's busy. It's a hustling, reactive thing. So when organizations aren't being intentional about slowing down, keeping the human in the lead, where they're doing that view of what are the signals we're seeing and how do we tie that back, you've got to make sure that the vendors you're working with know that they need to be doing that. And I think this is one of the most important parts, and it speaks to a branding around being Procom verified. But it's are the organizations and vendors that you are talking to showing you the evidence, not just the cleared status, right? A clear, what does it actually mean? And I think that's an area that matters more really than what people are actually admitting to. In this case, is can we open up and say what it's clear? But you need to talk to organizations about where things are being done. You need to understand if there's an offshore subcontracting piece to what's happening, right? Not just, okay, they said to trust us. It looks like it's cleared. Everything's good. Let's move on. So I think a high level of skeptical criticism up front, but with the fact that people are working to be honest, just get it to be vet and proved up front before you go any further. So if you have that, and then you start thinking about Procom, right? And again, this is one of the big
Right.
attractors for me to be here, and the question that you just asked directly as well. Let's be direct about where we're at. Your audience is sophisticated. I'm not going to sneak anything through them and say, like, yeah, we've got it all baked and we're rolling it out. The integrated layer that we're calling the talent decision engine, that's in active build. It's not in production today, but what is in production today and has been for years within our organization is the operational substance that exists underneath it. So think about
Okay.
reference checking, think about background validation, ID verification, employment timeline analysis, back office candidate verification, and this will not be a surprise, but our AI-driven screening agent at the front end. In essence, we currently train our team what fraud looks like if you're thinking up and down the funnel, from resumes to behavior indicators. Then they've got the requirement to report it. And I think this is a unique part. You can train it, but do your people have the courage to say, hey, we see something that's going on? They've got to report it. They've got to document it. They've got to be honest with our
Right.
customers. And Elliot, here's the catch. They have to be honest with our customer no matter where they are in the timeline. So if we find out
Right.
something fraudulent the day before that person's starting, the day before the project is launching, we're coming forward and saying we've got a risk. People need to understand that this is agile now, right? The world's moving so fast politically, economically, all the technology and intelligence. You have to be okay knowing we're partnering with you through the funnel, but we're going to tell you if something comes up. That's not a measure of failure. That's a measure of transparency and clarity. And that's a piece about building trust, right? So we're doing that now. And that's the discipline embedded in our values at the organization so that we're not overcome by the revenue that's associated to the outcome. We are really looking at what do we do to do things right? Our purpose at Procom is to help people make progress, but we want to do that in a clear fashion. So those capabilities, as I'm mentioning, that's all mature in what we're doing. And so the cool part with this talent decision engine, this is where we're really building in that layer that brings the top of the funnel, all of those signals that we're seeing, so that verification happens, as I mentioned earlier, right at the beginning when the resume enters the funnel, as opposed to anything that's happening after interview and selection. So I think it's a fascinating spot. And, our CEO, Kent, he actually said something really interesting. And I love visuals, right? So if we ask everyone, like I listen to podcasts all the time while I'm driving. So if you're driving along, let me give you a visual of the supply chain now, the talent supply chain. You think
Mhm.
of, I'm going to think of a trend here for ladies who, and maybe many men use them too, but the red light masks. Those are everywhere, right? Red light therapy
Yep.
masks make all the collagen and beauty come back into our faces. But there's so many fraudulent organizations that have fake masks. So now the real ones are sending you a little Q or a little QR code you can scan so you can see the path of how it was created and where it came from. Or even let's go to like
Mhm.
East Coast East Coast where the lobsters live. How do you verify where your lobster was grown? Is it coming from the ocean or is it coming from a farm? Or go to luxury purses. Look at the supply of how it was built to get fraudulent actors out. It's exactly the same thing that's starting to go on in the talent chain.
Well, we saw this years ago in we at one point, HR Today also owned Corporate Responsibility magazine. We saw it in the diamond trade is where it really
Mhm.
started about 15 years ago with third-party assurance and the supply chain issues to make sure you weren't getting diamonds that came from conflict countries, etc.
Yeah.
And now it's spread, but it has not come into the market. And the fact that your talent decision engine is actually a technology that you lay into your process to ensure the candidates can be verified backwards as to where they came from is an enhancement, and it creates certainly the opportunity for greater trust. And
Yeah.
while other providers say they've got it and that they do it, it's not on a platform, it's not technologically driven, it's not being evaluated in real time. So that is certainly an innovation, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we are running almost out of time, Carolyn. So I'm gonna have you back to talk more about this trust issue and how you're doing it and how you're working with clients to make that work. So I think that we are, intrigued. And like I said at the beginning, I trust you unless you're a foreign spy. But how would I know that? I don't have talent decision engine in our podcast business, but I probably should look at it. So
Right.
I want to thank you for taking part in this podcast. For our listeners out in the audience, you've heard Carolyn Levy, who is the president of consulting services for Procom, which provides contract staffing, IT consulting, and global talent and technology and direct hire services. So, Carolyn, thanks for being part of the podcast. And for our audience, we'll look forward to having you on another HR Today educational podcast.